All right. So, sorry, that was a lot of technical difficulties there that I had with my microphone. It's a cheap piece of shit, and I don't make a lot of money. But my name's Nolan Hesse. I am a father of two, and I'm making this political podcast because there's a lot of random shit going on in the world, and I'm honestly kind of sick of it, especially the divide in America. Um, I come from more the right side of politics, and so after Charlie Kirk died, I kind of was motivated to like, all right, I gotta be somewhat voice for reason. So this isn't really just for the right though. It's to show the right like, hey, we like the real path to being like, hey, let's just calm down a little bit. And it's also for more left wing people to be a little bit more like, hey, this is actually what the most of the right believe in, not what we think and what we've been almost indoctrinated to believe. Because that is a reality here, is that the left is a victim of some indoctrination and years of going on, especially in the media, that's kind of ran by corporate entities and then some foreign agitators. And as we go through this series, I'm going to go into some of that. So these podcasts I'm going to try to knock out 3 a week. They're going to be anywhere from 20, 30, 40 minutes, so on your way to work, on your way to whatever. Anyway, this is a Letter to the Left podcast. It's just a dive into political concepts, theories, why things are the way they are, and try to offer most people kind of a macro of what really is the reality versus what is kind of being pushed on people, right? I apologize for the video quality because I'm working off my laptop. I'm still working on trying to improve it. Obviously, it's my first one. This is the inaugural podcast. So yeah. Anyway, let's get into it. First things first. This episode is the state of America and why the division. I'm going to go into kind of where it started, kind of how it grew, and why you're seeing kind of the buzzwords like you hear a lot of the left today, and it evolved over time. But the big one is right. They're fascists, and most of the time that's illogical, right? And it's irrational, especially since the right inherently can't be fascist because they literally are like they're not close to fascism in the sense that like fascism involves socialism inherently, so you have to involve some sort of seizure of from the government to private industry and actually run it as a government entity. So like when people say like, oh, they're fascists, like that's not entirely true at all. That's kind of ludicrous to say the least. um, anyway, so the division began really in 2008. Well, shortly before that, 2007. But if you guys don't remember, that was a huge, huge election year. And we had um, John McCain and Barack Hussein Obama. Well, the Democrats, kind of measuring what was going on with Bush and that kind of area and what was going on there, ended up turning into um, what's the term? The left was kind of like falling apart, really, right? And so they kind of put their chips, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers, who were still in charge back then. They kind of put in, hey, I need to. Sorry about that. I had to break because I had to help put one of the little girls down to bed. So anyway, where I was going. So I was kind of talking about how back in 2008 or prior to 2008, the Democratic Party was trying to essentially organize and revamp and rebrand. They were a lot of old heads, which shocker, there's still a lot of old heads today. Um, but they decided to go with Barack Obama, a young black man from who represented a part of Chicago area. So when they did that and they started running, they didn't have a lot of traction because back then um, it was a lot about experience. What have these people done? And John McCain had all the experience. I mean, this man was a vet. He was known as the Maverick. He had all this experience and all this policy making and household name in politics for a while. That the Democrats were like, how are we going to compete? Essentially, well, a lot of those older guys, gals as well, they decided, well, hey, why not use race? That's exactly what they did. They weaponized his race. They did that for years. Correction. They did it for that whole election cycle. It was, hey, Everything you ever heard, whether it was media pundits, whether it was Democratic representatives, whether it was campaign, everything on the trail was, well, if you don't like him, it's because he's black. And they still, some of them still to this day think that. And no matter what the Republicans did, they've never had to face that before, right? Like they were like, what, like on a mass scale. Like this was not like a one off, two off. This was a mass scale thing where it was like, no matter what you said or did, it was, I don't like, or you don't like Obama because he's black. Well, it worked, right? And it worked very efficiently. It worked very well. And the Democrats, realizing how great that worked, they decided that, hey, what I'm going to do is we're going to keep doing this. We're going to let this ride. So you heard it all over. It was no matter how bad he did his first term. It's no matter what mistakes he made his first term. It was no matter what he did his first term. It was what? It was the only reason people are bringing this up is because he is black. That's essentially it. And it continued on through that. So then it went to the midterms. It went into the next election, which you saw it with Mitt Romney or against Mitt Romney. They carried that forward and eventually became, well, as 2014 started to come around, people started to kind of lose a little bit of it. I mean, you saw a revamp, and I'm going to get to that and the timeline here in a second. But you saw people were like, okay, well, we can't just hang our hat on the racist card anymore, right? You can't just do that all the time because eventually it's going to grow. People are going to grow out of it, right? Because he's still a president that got elected. He's still a black president got elected in America, right? So you can't say the system's rigged or the system's racist or anything like that because literally a black man made it to the top. So it's like, what? Well, then they decided, okay, well, we have a new thing we can go under, and that's gay marriage. Republicans tend to be more religious. They tend to be against gay marriage. And I'll caveat that with what is gay marriage. A lot of people don't believe in it, right? When people say like, oh, they're just bigoted because they hate him, it's like some of them, yes. There's always some, right? But the vast majority just don't believe it exists because in a lot of Christian theologies, depending on what kind of Christian you are, like gay marriage, like marriage itself is granted by God. It's a bond granted and sealed by God, and he does not believe in that, right? So you can't, then it does not exist in the eyes of God. That was the big difference there. And liberals were more on the line of like, well, it's just a legal thing. It's like, okay, well, no, but to these people, it's not, right? Either way, I digress. As we started to move forward, it became, hey, now people are bigoted. They're racist and bigoted, right? And they continue that on through all of Obama's second term. Then came Trump. And obviously, the race card, the bigot card, all that stuff, they really tried to hammer on, right? And this is now let me go back a little bit. This is now 8 years of constant. The Republicans, everything that has to do with Republicanism is racist. And you have a whole generation essentially growing up in the young adult adolescent that grew up listening to this by all their favorite celebrities that were paid off by Democrats and or influenced by Democrats that don't actually keep track of politics and or any kind of reporter on the media. If they started to get into politics, it was always what? It was, well, the Republicans are racist because of this. Every time they disagree, well, that's just because they're racist. It has nothing to do with the logic or rationale of what they think or why they think that. And that kind of became a rallying cry. And come 2016, guess what? You got a whole other thing you can weaponize, gender, right? Because then it became, oh, well, you just don't want women to be president because it was Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. And all of a sudden, people started losing their mind. And they're like, what? Like, what? Like, you can't vote for Trump. You have to vote for the woman. You already didn't vote for the black man, and you didn't vote for gay marriage. So now you have to vote for Trump. Or now you have to vote for Clinton, excuse me. And so it evolved into that. And one of the big things is they weaponized race again to be like, well, he didn't like, even though Trump had like the same policies on the border as like every Democrat before him prior to that point, it became, oh, now we're going to switch our party's beliefs and we're going to weaponize his border policy because that was the strongest policy by far, still is to this day in 2026. And it became oh my gosh, like this is how they're doing it. And so they move forward. Trump gets
Trump gets in office, right? And they're like, okay, well, now we have to really go on the offensive. So now just everything has to be tied to race. Everything has to be tied to gender. Everything has to be tied to gay marriage. Every kind of minority slash historically marginalized group that you could possibly think of or we've been taught to think of, right, is now a victim here. And they associate Trump with being the villain of that, which is, again, irrational. It's untrue. But they think that truly. And as they started moving forward and all the Russian collusion shit and all this stuff started to happen, again, I'll have a podcast on that because we all know now, as 2026 goes on, that was completely fake. And there's, again, things to prove that. But we go into this, and then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, 4 years goes down the line, Summer of Love happens, 2020. George Floyd, that whole situation, dive into it. It gets even more ridiculous the more you go into it, right? But they weaponize it again in another election year, and it goes back to that trend. Anything that has to do with the marginalized group is their weapon of choice. Because if they can align themselves victimly, or if they can align themselves even with the victim, if not completely make yourself out to be a victim, you are inherently going to win because you've indoctrinated people so far to like, hey, you can't talk against these people. And part of that comes from our scars from the civil rights movement and then obviously slavery 100 years before that. So it's kind of like inbred in our culture as Americans to be like, well, we got to stick for the little guy, right? But it's like at some point there is actual equality in laws and civics and shit like that. And then now you're looking for it. And the Democrats tried to weaponize it in a time that moved it all the way up. Well, now we're in 2020. Let's get, Obama happens pretty much. It's just a revamp. It was a complete catastrophe as an administration, and no one can deny that anymore. So, again, I want the left to listen to this. I want you to use these arguments and this knowledge to talk to your leftist friends, not just argue with them, but talk to them about it. Because this is a reality here. All that indoctrination of that whole generation under that, right? All that stuff is going on now in almost a 12-year span. Now going on 16 years, you get to 2024, you have essentially a generation and a half that grew up listening to, well, everything the Republican is racist, bigoted, sexist, whatever they could do to make themselves, victimly aligned. And now we're here. And what does that mean? It's very simple. That's when you start hearing the fascist, right? It's Donald Trump's a fascist. They're all fascists, which is completely ludicrous, right? Because we know that. And we know that that's absolutely preposterous. Okay, it really is. Fascism is, again, it's rooted in totalitarianism. You can't have a side, the right, historically in America, at least the last 50, 60 years, has wanted, well, 50-ish, I guess, 40-ish, 50-ish, have wanted less government. The old Reagan, it's like less government intervention, less government control of most things. You cannot have fascism with that, okay? But they're never going to tell you that, right? Because it becomes an issue to what a lot of that leftist ideology has professed and essentially identified themselves with. This is an identity issue for the Democratic Party now because they've aligned themselves so hard and tripled down, quadrupled down on these constructs of constantly using marginalized people as their political point, as their it's like a basket of bread for them. It's like here we're constantly just going to keep taking from that basket, right? It's constant. Now they're running out. Right, and they're grasping for straws, and it's created all this division because the problem is once you keep doing that, again, that whole generation is starting to think to themselves like, oh, these people are fascists. It's okay to assault them, and you see it all over Twitter, right? The left is far more violent than the right these days, far more. It's not even close. And so, again, you have a good example of in the recent year or year and a half, it's most of the people that are doing these shootings and stuff like that are not these white supremacists that they claim they are, right? They tend to be like some sort of anarchist style, anti-fascist style riots and stuff like that are all coordinating with the same groups. And that's because of that notion that started around 2006 to 2008 where They weaponize race of someone to get them in the office. And people like the Schumers, the Pelosi's, and all that, they just want to keep the power, right? So they want to keep getting elected. So they just kept doubling down because they're like, well, I don't care what they think. I just want to stay in power. They love that. They love the pomp. They love the circumstance. They love all of that of being in power. And now they're realizing that their party's out of control. And that's where you saw the rise of Ilhan Omar and AOC, who are these nut jobs, it seems, right? Like, even if you're a leftist, and I want leftists to hear me out on this, those people are they're issues, all right? Because they don't actually know anything about what's going on, all right? They're constantly spouting off complete ignorant statements, and it hurts their credibility. It makes them look like a fool. But they still sit there and do it. And the reason why they do that is because they truly believe that the other side are a bunch of fascists and racists, and they need to be exterminated. That's the reality of the world we're living in. And we saw it with Charlie Kirk. We saw it with this wave of trans people, right, that ended up shooting up schools and stuff. You've seen it multiple times now, like, or foiled plans to do that, and they almost always identify as some sort of trans, or it's about the marginalized grouping. Those people are using that as a rallying cry, thinking, well, Donald Trump and all the Republicans are a problem, and the whole country wants my head, so I have to defend myself, and I have to take them out first because they're fascist, so I'm justified in that. That is a legitimate thing that they believe in, and that is why it's continued. And they will never admit, and the problem is, like, at this point, a lot of, like, those people specifically, like those anarchist style hyper leftists that's kind of completely engulfing the Democratic Party, they're never going to admit that they're wrong because they've been so indoctrinated from those days back at that time frame in the 2008 time to be like, no, this is how it is. I grew up this way. I was grown up. I was told, and I have been indoctrinated, and I grew up knowing this is the truth, right? So, well, how do we fix that, right? Like, it's like, oh crap. Like, how do we, as more right-wing people, try to bring this topic up? Because again, you bring this up like I'm doing it to everyone here now, all right? Hopefully a mix of political ideologies, is that we have to sit there and sit at the table, or in your classrooms. You can't be scared to sit there. You can't be scared to sit there and just like, all right, well, because I grew up when I went to college, all right, obviously colleges have truly become more leftist breeding grounds. And we'll get into another podcast on that because it's too long to go into, and the overarching constructs of how that happened too. It's a whole thing. But you can't be scared to sit there and challenge. The right needs to challenge ideology. They need to be like, okay, for example, well, you're just a fascist. Okay, what is fascism? What is it, right? What is fascism? A lot of people don't actually know what fascism is. It's almost shocking, right? Because if you ask most people what fascism is, you would know, like, they would say, like, oh, well, it's right-wing extremism, which, okay, yeah, sure. If you going into the actual political construct of the political spectrum, like, the spectrum is not a line, right? There's no left and right. It's a circle. It's a pendulum, and there's all sorts of things. Authoritarian on the top, and then there's anarchy at the bottom, and then the right and the left sides of that oval shape, if you will, right? And then there's different ticks. As socialism and communism are towards an authoritarian left, well, like fascism is more toward the authoritarian right on that side of the circle, right? But the thing is like once you hit authoritarianism, communism and fascism are like right next to each other. And that's like the dirty secret. Is like they're almost fucking identical. It's just what the emphasis is on, whether it's socioeconomic status, which is like more communistic, or it's like nationality slash culture, like, you know what I'm saying, like cultural elitism, essentially. So, when it comes to like what is fascism, it's, as Google literally defines it, authoritarian ultranationalist political ideology characterized by a dictatorial leader, a powerful and often exclusionary nationalism, and forcible suppression of opposition. You ask them to recite that, and none of them will be able to define that. Literally. There's not a single leftist that will sit there and tell that exact same thing. And then when they do, they say some sort of authoritarianism. You say, what kind of authoritarianism? Communism is authoritarianism. Socialism is a loose authoritarianism. Hate to break it to you, it is not for the people. So, like, you have to be able to talk about that, and you have to be able to challenge them on that. When they call you a Nazi, what is a Nazi? What's the definition of a Nazi? Am I a member of that party? Because, like, I'm not German, nor am I socialist. The National Social Party of Germany were the Nazis. They were a fascist party, which is the overarching construct of what they believe in, which inherently has to be authoritarian. You don't have that with the Republican Party right now. Contrary to what every liberal influencer wants to tell you to try to get more views and get more likes, because they know that that's how they drive it up, because now they're in that cycle, that vicious cycle where they have to double down, triple down on those constructs, because again, they're going to the point of no return. The left is at the point of no return here. They keep moving towards that line because their constituents, because they're raised and indoctrinated, and they took it too far to win a couple elections in a row. Now they're indoctrinated, like, well, all of our boomer Democrats that are ignorant, and I'll get to them another podcast too, because they're morons just as much, so are some of the right-wing boomers, right? But, like, they're like, well, we have to do this because we grew up this way. Like, we grew this flock essentially under us to believe this stuff, and we have to get these votes in order to survive. And you see it now, right? The Congressional Democrat approval rating is polling consistently in the 17%, which is the lowest any party in American history has ever polled since they've done polling. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you see all these stunts, right? You see these stunts with, like, the government shutdown, and then they, like, tried to blame it on Trump and the Republicans, and it was like, dude, it was blatantly obvious that the minority party is almost always the one to initiate and successfully shut down the government. They have to be, because again, if you know how the Senate works, it's any kind of like spending bill that goes through has to go through to 60 to 40 or a 60 vote, right? If you have the minority, but you're not necessarily that much of a majority in Congress and you can't get a 60 on your own party, it's always the minority party that ends up initiating the shutdown because they don't vote in order to pass that CR bill. But again, they tried to pass that. That's why you're seeing all this crazy, like, we're just going to go to the side. Like, you're ignoring, like, the migrants and the migrant crime, and the propaganda campaign right now is insane. That's because the left is literally fighting for their lives. So what now? Again, like I talked to my leftists who I hope listen and made it this point. How you fix that is by, first of all, admitting on some things that, yeah, the Republicans are better in. For example, how the economy should work. That's a reality. All right? Now, there's things that Republicans aren't good at with the economy, right? But right now, especially as we're post-Biden era going into yet another Trump era, you're seeing the general uptick in economic numbers. All right? It's blatantly obvious. It's everywhere. You can look it up through the Bureau of Economic Statistics. It's all over the place. And also, like, you have to be able to kind of police your own here. Because, again, there's a faction of your left that is growing increasingly stronger and owns the left now. Like, I wouldn't even call it a faction. I say the majority of your party is now this far left anarcho type, almost European socialist / communist style. I mean, literally as I talk here, there are people protesting a literal dictator's kidnapping. I mean, it was, right? There's more to do that, but literal dictator's kidnapping in Maduro. And just 4 months ago, they were doing no kings protests, declaring that Trump shouldn't be a king and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, now they're like protesting that, oh, Maduro's a victim and you shouldn't have done that and all this. While literally the people of Venezuela are celebrating nonstop in the streets. The Democratic Party, and I hope you leftists hear me out, like, you are one of the issues here in why this divide has happened, because there is no budging with you. A political survey came out several months ago that proved over 30 years of studying each side of the political spectrum, especially in America, is that the right is far more politically diverse than the left. All right? The left is far more politically totalitarian. What does that mean? That means like we have a lot more differences on the right. Can hurt us in elections, right? Because then it's like, well, I'm not going to vote for you because like you don't believe in this. But we have a lot more of political diversity versus the left is like, if you don't believe in me, and you've seen it now, right? If you don't believe in me, you're racist, you're bigoted, you're whatever, and you're not one of us. That's a problem because that's why this continuation of this divide has gotten deeper and deeper and deeper, and why people like Trump, why people end up getting elected because of that. You can't sit here and try to be realistic and try to tell someone that they're wrong just because you don't agree with them. You have to bring up the logic and the rationale, and the left has completely lost that ability because all they do is go down to the, well, you're racist because you don't believe in this. You're bigoted because you don't believe in this. Or you want strong border. No, you just don't like Mexicans. Like, no, that has nothing to do with it. It's because literally a strong border means a sovereign nation. You know, a good example of this, right? And then there will be another podcast on this too, I promise. But like when Trump, the Democrats were in charge post-Trump, right? By a long mile. None of them offered, and still none of them today offer to change the border, any kind of border laws or any kind of enforcement actually legally. None of them have voted that, right? It's all about, you know, what they just didn't enforce it during Biden's time. That's all they did. They just didn't enforce it. But it was still there. It was still the law. It still says black and white Curtis Castro. If you are an illegal migrant in this country, you are subject to detainment and deportation at any time. That's black and white in U.S. Border Code. And they have not even tried to change that. Why? Because the left knows that would be political suicide. Because they know all they're doing is using the whole border thing as a way to get Big Bad Orange Man out. All right? Because they just want to get Big Bad Orange Man. And they've indoctrinated a whole generation into just wanting to get Big Bad Orange Man. Right? Now, I'm no Trump sycophant. You guys will learn that as the podcast goes on. Like, I have my criticisms too. Right? But that's the reality of what we're living in, because that's what's pushed a lot of people over to Trump is the inherent almost delusion of the left, where it's like he's living rent free in everyone's minds. That's exactly what's happened. So, it's one of those things where you have to. If you're a right wing guy, you have to challenge a little bit. You have to. All right, you have to be like, hey, but what about this? Why is this? You can't just stay silent anymore. We have to go on the offensive a little bit, especially like in a more calm, neat tone, not whiny and crazy conspiracy theorists just out the wazoo all the time. Not to say that those things can't be true, but it's like it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, what, you know? So, and I do have one on Nick Fuentes. I'll have one on kind of right-wing influencers and the faction. Actually, I think that's my next podcast. The faction of the right and how Fuentes, Carlson, and Owens have all kind of done this with Ben Shapiro too, because he's just as guilty, right? Especially after the fallout of the death of Charlie Kirk, and what we need to do about it, because that's probably the most dangerous part, to be honest with you, is there's a lot of conspiracy theories about, you know, Nick Fuentes being a Fed or being a liberal operative. He doesn't help his case at all. At all. Literally, like, I've never seen any kind of right-wing person sit there and try to influence people not to vote at all just because they're a single issue. Like, single-issue voters are the bane of society, all right? You see it with liberal women all the time. It's like abortion. It's like one thing or two things, and it's like, dude, that's stupid. Like, there's so much bigger things that affect your daily life, like economic policy, national security, like border policy, shit like that, that you're just ignoring for the sake of a couple social issues that really are almost, what, I would say archaic at this point, a lot of the time, you know? So I'll get that in my next podcast. So I'm going to try to hit it on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, with Fridays having a little whiskey. As you can see, I'm a huge whiskey fan, so I'm going to pop one and show you guys, and then we'll get into it. And Fridays are going to be a good time, I think. I think so. Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully you guys reference me too, because, again, my whole purpose of this is to explain and to offer a more level-headed argument-style discussion on how we can move things forward. And, again, like, as I get going if I can get more people to listen, if I can get any people to listen to this, I'm going to start throwing maybe some nicer equipment, obviously, maybe like a real camera and, maybe like a real kind of studio looking thing that I can pull in and out and all that. So, anyway, hope you guys had a good night. I hope you find this on your way to work or whatever somewhat informational. You kind of got a macro of kind of where this divide truly started, where it came from. And I don't want my leftist friends in this to be offended by this. I know it's hard. I'm joking. I'm just joking. But it is a reality here of kind of the timeline of how this happened and why you're seeing this growth of disdain for two sides. Okay? So anyway, I hope you guys have a safe drive or a good night or a good morning, whatever the hell you're doing. And hopefully you get through it, whatever you're getting through, because God willing, it's all we got. So anyway, good night, good day, whatever. See you guys. This is the Letter to the Left podcast, and this is the end of the inaugural podcast.